Welcome to Therapy by Choice podcast. My name is Robyne Vance. I am your host for this podcast and an associate marriage and family therapist working with individuals, couples, and families. My therapeutic services are offered through Therapy by Choice, which is a private practice with offices located in San Jose and Palo Alto, California. On this podcast, we offer educational information on a variety of mental health topics. We speak to specialists in the field, and we answer your questions. We focus on helping you navigate life's challenges and offer easy-to-follow practical advice and opinions. Hello, and thank you for joining me for my two-part interview with licensed educational psychologist Ken Kafele here on Therapy by Choice podcast. In part one of this interview, we discuss how schools and families can support children's mental health through early recognition, safe environments, and collaboration. Now, please enjoy part two of my interview, which is also the season 2 finale here on Therapy by Choice podcast. All right, so shifting gears a bit, I want to talk a little bit about learning abilities, which we've definitely skimmed over a bit some. And I kind of trying to talk about every kid learns differently, and some may need some extra support to kind of really thrive.
Right.
How do learning disabilities intersect with mental health concerns in children?
Oh, that's a good one. And this is an interesting one because a learning disability is something that really only got created towards the 70s. And I wouldn't even say created, but recognized and become a diagnosable condition. And the reason I say it's a little bit different is because the other disabilities, typically you can see them coming from a mile away. There's a long history, documentation throughout the ages of these types of conditions. But a learning disability is interesting in that it kind of shows up, like I said, only about 50 years ago. But what is a learning disability? We kind of have to talk about the legal definition and what they're trying to get at when they say learning disability. Okay, so a learning disability is anybody who has an expected intelligence level, okay? And then they have a lower than expected achievement level. And when I say achievement, I mean reading, writing, arithmetic. Okay. So you have average intelligence, but for whatever reason, you have below average, significantly below average, reading, writing, or mathematic abilities. Okay. That's not it, because anybody can have that type of a discrepancy. But then the next part is that you have to have what they call a processing deficit. And there's a few processing deficits. So there's an attention, there's auditory processing, there's visual processing, there's visual motor integration, and memory. Okay, short-term memory. So if you have an organic, what you would conceive as an organic deficit in one of those areas, and you have an average IQ, and you have significantly below average performance in one of those areas, technically you can meet the definition as a student with a specific learning disability. But this is where it gets tricky. It's really hard to decipher that person from anybody else. Typically, that person gets diagnosed because somebody is advocating that they need more than the general education classroom can give them. Okay. So that could be a teacher, it could be a parent, or sometimes it could have nothing to do with academics at all. It could be behavior related, but because the child is so much of a behavior problem, they are not achieving academically, even though they have average intelligence. So the system is to find, if he cannot function, she cannot function in a general ed classroom, maybe the special ed is a better environment for them, even though technically they may not meet the criteria. So what would that child look like in a classroom? Far behind in reading, far behind in their ability to put together a written prose or sentence or a paragraph, far behind in their ability to complete arithmetic. And I'm just talking about multiplication, division, adding and subtracting, fractions, decimals, and percents. Most of our high schoolers, when they graduate 12th grade, can't not do that. We're not talking about algebra, geometry, trig, calculus, any of that yet. So just the basics. So that is what a learning disability looks like. But can you see it? If I go into a classroom, could you pick out who has a learning disability and who doesn't? You will have a hard time doing that, a significant hard time doing it. And you might even find a couple of general ed students in there that you would say, well, why don't they qualify? And the answer is, well, because they haven't been referred. The referral usually drives placement. So the kids who get referred the most are typically those who get placed the most. And I'm saying all this to say a learning disability, there are people who learn differently. There are people who different strategies work better than others. But the answer to that is everybody can benefit from a multidimensional approach. Nobody should be being taught in one way. Everybody should get all the different modes: tactile, kinesthetic, auditory, visual. If you're only teaching somebody in a visual way and they're not responding auditorily like the way you want them to, you're setting them up for failure. Okay, so
Yes.
everybody should be getting all of those modes of education. And that way, you hit all levels. So it's a mixture between an environmental issue and the student. That's what I would say. If I had to give you my interpretation of what it was, it's a mismatch between the environment and the person. But technically, I kind of have already given you the definition: average IQ, below average achievement with a processing deficit.
And you were speaking a little bit about it, but some of the learning difficulties, like ADHD, how do ADHD or executive function issues or sensory processing differences affect learning and behavior in school-age children?
Oh, that's perfect. Because now we're talking about two different categories. Remember, we started off in the beginning talking about 13 different categories for a disabling condition. One of them is a specific learning disability, and you just brought up another one: ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, here's the thing with ADHD: it doesn't serve as a standalone qualifying criteria. It falls under another criteria called an other health impairment. So, an other health impairment can be anything that is considered an organic health problem that causes you difficulties academically. It could be asthma. It could be sickle cell. It could be ADHD. It could be what are some other things that would cause you cystic fibrosis? There are a number of medical conditions that would cause you to a seizure disorder that will cause you to have cognitive deficits or academic deficits. So ADHD would fall under an other health impairment. And what you would see different in ADHD student versus a specific learning disabled student, a lot of times the ADHD student doesn't have a lot of academic deficits. They are with grade level or sometimes above. The ADHD student is the one that we talked about earlier who goes too fast for the curriculum. So they learned it once or twice, they got it, they're on to the next thing. But I gotta stay on page 22 because that's where the class is on. I can't take it. I gotta do something else. I'm playing on my computer. I'm talking to my friend. But I got the information, but I'm doing something else. I'm disruptive now. Now I'm getting called out. Now I'm getting sent out of the class. Now I'm missing instruction. That's causing me to fall further behind. That would be the academic part. Well, they're missing so much instruction because their behavior is bad, but it's really that their ADHD means that you can't select what you want to pay attention to, which means you're paying attention to everything. It's not that you're not paying attention. You're paying attention to everything. And it's hard for you to filter what is important information versus what is not. And you ask executive functioning. How do I organize my thoughts? How do I focus my attention? How do I carry out a task one at a time so that I can come to completion, so that I can begin and complete a task? Do I have the tools to have effective time management? Am I organized? Those are the things that can be explicitly taught and you can help somebody with. Um, but it's different from our specific learning disabled students because that should be geared strictly towards academic tutoring or psychoeducational tutoring. They just don't necessarily have the academic skills to do what's being asked of them. Where the ADHD student, typically they have the skills, but they don't, like you said, Robyne, have the executive function portion.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that being said, that again, but kind of bringing it back around to the educator component with these specific learning challenges and some other things, how can educators assess a child's strengths and weaknesses? I know that we have a lot of assessments that we can do,
Mm,
formalized, assessments with research back. But how can
okay.
educators assess a child's strengths and weaknesses holistically?
Got okay. And holistic was the key word right there, right at the end. That one threw me for a loop. Okay. Now, when you're talking about assessing somebody holistically, it has to go way beyond the school. It has to go into their diet. It goes into their spirituality. It goes into their home life. It is a thorough, holistic approach. And typically, your public school can't get that involved because, we have certain guidelines and protections on privacy, FERPA, HIPAA guidelines, so FERPA or HIPAA. These are different guidelines that professionals, mental health and medical professionals use to protect the confidentiality of the people that we work with. So
Yes.
typically we can't get information on certain medical conditions or, spirituality or home life. But if you can, and a parent or a family is willing, an educator can just have a conversation, parent teacher conferences. Is there anything different that's been going on? One of the best questions that I asked during my interview is there anything within the last 5 years that has caused a significant change in the family, such as
Mhm.
a divorce, a parent, a grandparent dying? I see a lot of
Yeah.
grandparents that have made the transition and had a drastic effect on the child, the
Yes.
grandchild. So
Mhm.
any of these major life events that can absolutely have an effect on the child, and you want to be able to identify these things because it may not be ADHD. It may not be a specific learning disability. Maybe I'm going between two houses because my parents are separated and I'm tired every single morning because I'm coming
Yeah.
from, I don't know, Ukaipa and then Compton the next day, but I'm still showing up. So that holistic approach, like you said, is very key. Or maybe it's the month of Ramadan and I've been fasting all day. And now you want me to, to do 1,000 math problems, read this book, and then go on to Teams and write up a paragraph. That's going to be difficult. So
Yeah.
being able to understand all of that, it's like I said, it can be daunting because you have a bunch of different personalities and different families you work with. But if you want to know, a lot of families are willing to give you that information as long as it helps the child. So don't be afraid to respectfully ask, don't downplay somebody because of their background. For example, a lot of us work with families that are, how can I say it? They are involved. And what I mean by that,
Yes.
they, yeah, have gang ties and involvement. You may know that. And you may want to say and just write everything off to, well, they're just a gangbanger. Oh, their family doesn't care. They can do that. Are they there every day? Yeah. Do they show up to class every day? Yeah. Well, they have the option of not coming at all. What is it that's getting them to come every day? And how can we build on those successes? Um,
Mm.
those are the things that you implement when you're taking a holistic approach, like you said, Robin. It's so key. And I think that's what gets missed a lot because we get so much pressure from administrators to qualify certain students, so much pressure from parents, lawyers, because they get involved too, to qualify students. Because we haven't also talked about the benefits that some people use the IEP and 504 for to take advantage of the educational system. We haven't talked about
Yes.
that yet. So a lot of people want to get in, not necessarily because of those reasons, but this really helps you to identify that holistic approach. Is it an organic? difficulty that they're experiencing that they were either born with or that their environment has caused in them? Or is this just a temporary adjustment issue that most children would experience in a situation like that? So you have to look at it holistically.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned a lot there that's just really important and something that I think caregivers can know and also educators as well. A lot of things there to consider. And I know that we spoke earlier about it and a little bit now, but can you specifically kind of get a little bit more into the role of IEPs and 504 plans in supporting learning and mental health together?
Absolutely. Um, let's start off with the 504 plan because it doesn't take as much of an assessment. It's not as much of a process to get involved. Okay, so let's start with the Section
Okay.
504 plan. So the Section 504 plan, like I said, is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and it is considered civil rights legislation, which means it's not exclusive to the school. Anybody who has a handicapping condition that substantially limits any life activity can qualify for 504 at their job. So if you have, I don't know, let's say, like I said, asthma, and you need certain accommodations, you can get a 504 at your job or at your school. If you,
Hmm.
are somewhat fidgety and maybe you need to test in a distraction-free environment, you can possibly qualify for a 504. You just have to have a diagnosed condition. It doesn't have to be within the school, it could be anywhere. And you
Hmm.
have to be demonstrating some type of need. It doesn't take a big evaluation. A few people can get together, parent, administrator, teacher, student, and can just talk about some general strategies that they're going to put together to kind of help remediate the situation. That's a typical 504. Okay, so they'll put it onto a document. It might be 1 or 2 pages, just saying, oh, hey, if Ken 2 asks to go to the restroom, he needs to really go to the restroom. That's it. Let him
Okay.
go. Something
Okay.
like that. Okay, so that's the Section 504. Then we have something called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it's been revised, I think, 6 or 7 times. The last one being, I want to say, in like 2008. So it's been a while, almost 20 or 30 years. But that one indicates what you do if you have a disabling condition that adversely impacts your education. But this one only lasts from the ages of 2 through 22. So once you
Mm.
graduate, it doesn't exist anymore. Before the age of 2, you don't get it, but there are other places you can go, like the regional center, where you can get support, especially for those,
Yes.
who are born with disabling conditions. So in an IDEA assessment, the school psychologist will be notified. Um, they have 15 days to do some preliminary, holistic background checks to see is this a good referral. If they decide to go through with it, there's a 60-day timeline put on us to complete a psychoeducational assessment. That will consist of a review of records, interview of all the stakeholders, observations in multiple settings, and then we start getting into the interesting part. And we're talking IQ tests, social emotional assessments, adaptive scales, rating scales. And this is when you really get to take a peek inside of a person's body and see how they're functioning from the inside out the best we can. Obviously, I
Yes.
can't split them open, but to the best of our ability. And then, as a result of that, the team will get together, they will sit down, and there's 5 mandatory members. There's the parent, there's an administrator, there's a school psychologist, there is a general ed teacher, and there's a special ed teacher. Those are the mandatory members of an IEP team. After the assessment, they get together, they determine what the assessment said. Well, this is the findings. They determine, is there a qualifying condition? Let's just say for sake, um, this is the number one condition that is diagnosed. And a specific learning disability with an auditory processing deficit. That's probably the number one by far. So,
Okay.
okay, the child has a specific learning disability with an auditory processing deficit. The next question is, okay, do they need special education to remediate that? Let's say the answer is yes. Okay, now they qualify for an IEP. What goals do they need to accomplish that? Well, They need to be able to read 60 words per minute. They need to be able to do multiple digit addition, and they need to be able to write a 2 paragraph, I don't know, essay. Okay, now how are they going to accomplish this? Well, they couldn't do it in the general ed class, and this is where the heat gets turned up. When you talk about getting an IEP, you're talking about going into special ed. A lot of parents do not understand that. They are not being told the correct information, and they're just being told your child is going to get help. What they need to also know is that that child is now being extracted from the general education environment and put in the special education environment where there are different expectations, different outcomes, um, and a whole other bag of worms. They'll say, maybe, okay, well, since he has a specific learning disability with auditory processing deficit, reading
Mhm.
might be difficult. Let's take him out of this general ed English class and put him in the special ed education English class. Because remember, in order to receive the services, you got to qualify. So this person's qualified. Now they're qualified. If you want the services are the special ed classes. Okay. They are the speech and language pathologists. They are the occupational therapists. So once they qualify, whatever services they receive, that is considered special education. Now they receive the services. Hopefully they are remediated and are able to exit the program and get right back into the general ed environment and go ahead and live a prosperous life. That is what we expect in both the 504 and in the IEP process.
Wow, that's a I can see now how that could be a lot.
A lot.
Uh,
It is absolutely right.
yes. And definitely I'm thinking all the different moving pieces and everyone that's involved. And
Correct.
then you have, of course, a kiddo in there somewhere.
Mm.
Um, and I think this kind of perfectly segues into, you know, caregivers and parents are always well-meaning, right? And part of the reason why we have conversations like this is so that from the mouth of an expert, they're able to hear how I can better navigate the system or what are some of the things that I can do to start on my end. But I understand from kind of seeing the other side of it that there's sometimes there can be a frustration there.
Absolutely.
From your point of view as an educator, as someone in the field, but also someone who happens by chance to be a parent, how can parents advocate for their kids' learning needs within the school system?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really good one. And we talked about earlier the uh, number one thing that demonstrates a child's success in school is the parental involvement. What can they do? Communication with the teacher is always going to be your best bet because that teacher spends the most time with your child. They have
Mm,
them when nobody else does. They have them when the lights are off, when the doors are closed. So it's almost like a waiter at your restaurant. You're not going to cuss out the waiter because when they go back, who knows, you might get spit in your food. You don't want to cuss the teachers out because you don't know what they might do behind those closed doors. Look, I've done thousands of hours of observation. Everybody don't like your kids. Okay, you need to understand that. People are human. They have lives too. They bring them to the school. And if your child has been getting on the nerves, or let's say you cuss them out 2 or 3 times, do you think they are going to want to help you out, regardless of what their job is, regardless of what oath they took,
yes.
regardless of what they're supposed to do? Do you honestly think they're going to come the next day and say, you know what? I got cussed out. I got caught all kind of B's and holes and all this. Let me go ahead and make sure little Johnny get his reading today. No, he could be if he's in the class. Okay, he might be just roaming the halls from getting kicked out so much. So have good communication with your parent. If you feel like that communication is starting to sour, make sure you start to increase your communication with the administrator because that person evaluates the teachers. Okay, so you have a little bit more leeway when you deal with them. Try not to jump over people's hands or steps unless it's absolutely necessary, because that's also something that can sour that relationship. And those two can solve probably, I would say, 85% of the problems. Just having constant communication with the teacher, constant communication with the administrator. If those two fail, you need to get a specialist involved from outside the school system who can
Hmm.
help advocate for you. And that's where you can reach out to somebody like us, a Djed Institute of Learning, or there are a number of other private organizations that provide advocacy services for parents and children who have special needs. So, number one is always communication, open lines of communication, respectful. And I'll give you a quick story. I had a parent who came up to the school and their child was wanted to change their classroom because they didn't like the teacher. They didn't feel like the teacher was giving them, challenging enough work.
Yes.
Teacher got offended. Teacher tried to block the transfer. Parent didn't like that, obviously. So the parent came up there and met with the teacher and gave the teacher a piece of their mind. Okay, well, that happened. So then the student goes back to school, and now the students get more flack. Okay, now the student is receiving, the anger or the frustration. So then the administrator gets involved. And then finally they just decide it's easier just to switch the class. But after the classes were switched, the parent brought each of those people involved a large tub of M&Ms. Now that's how you do it, okay?
Yes.
Because once they have their discussions, they have their, you know, had their words, she showed the appreciation by just a kind gesture. And that
Yes.
went further than any of her complaints right there, because now people are saying, oh, wait a minute, she is really in it for for the child, but she is not willing to step on anybody's neck to get there. Yeah, as a parents, we will become cutthroat for our child, but we also know children are children. A lot of times they can be a little mischievous, a little, a little this, a little that. Just a little this, a little that. And we
Yeah.
have to take everything with a grain of salt. So that showed respect, if nothing else. And they were much more willing to help her after that. So, just a quick anecdote about how these things work, keeping that open line of communication, keep it respectful. And if necessary, you got to take it up the line. If that doesn't work, you got to reach out for extra support.
Okay. Right. Definitely some tips and skills there to just really help our parents and our caregivers just kind of advocate and again, how they figure out how they can manage within the school system there.
Right.
Um, and then those are just such important points and, kind of bringing it back to um, every child's needs being unique and having a need a crucial need to have tailored support and I'm so glad that you're able to join me for this conversation because you do have this area of specialties. I know that you're really passionate about Afro-centered education and I really love to dive into that and also just talk a little bit about what makes it so impactful in today's educational landscape.
Okay.
So if you can just kind of educate our listeners, because we're aware that there are some systemic barriers preventing access to learning support and education. But what is Afro-centered education and how does it differ from traditional Western curriculum?
No, that is my life's work right there. Uh, and it lines right up with the reason I even got involved in this field in the first place. And it really stems from us seeing the systematic failure of those of African descent being able to excel in the academic arena. And me trying to find out, is this organic or is there more to it than this? Because I don't understand. So this whole thing comes from me trying to understand just that simple relationship. I
Mhm.
found out through my schooling that a school psychologist sits right at the gate of those going into gifted programs and to special education programs. And I felt like if I can get there, maybe I can make a difference.
Mhm.
Through that, that's when my eyes were really opened to the difficulties that we face as people of African descent. in the education arena. So it led me down the path of figuring out, well, how did education work up until now? Obviously people were building pyramids, inventing mathematics, inventing languages, inventing um, various systems, political system. What is going on? What am I not knowing? And that just took me on a wild goose chase that was so fulfilling and gave me so many answers that I didn't know what to do with. And came up to the point of African-centered education, and that simply means putting Africa as the center of the education um, process for those of African descent. Because right now, Europe is at the center of education for anybody in the Western world. Because what do you have to
Mm-hmm.
learn? You have to learn Greek. You have to learn Latin. Most of our schools are Spartans, right? You have the Spartans, which are Greek schools. Or you have the LA Romans, that's the high school, LA High Romans. So what is it about this Greco-Latin, Greco-Roman landscape that I don't know about? And where did they get it from? That led
Yes.
me directly prior to that, and who did they study from? The Nubians and the Egyptians. So it put the start of education there for me. And it really gave me an idea of how a person should learn. So then what is an African-centered education and why is it different? It starts with something called an African wisdom system, which you can find in a book by a man by the name of George G.M. James called The Legacy. And what he talks about is he gives you insight into what's called the African wisdom system, also known as the mystery system or the mystery schools in ancient Kemet or Egypt. And what these schools were just schools like we have today, but the process of learning was for you to become godlike. And this is not in the sense that we think of today as becoming the one holy creator who creates, everything in the universe,
Mm-hmm.
but you being a co-creator and you being at your best, at your most godlike, when you have found how to do something that can, can contribute to your society at the highest level. At that point, you become a god in that. Like we've talked about before, when you see somebody with extraordinary skills in a particular area, they're raised up to a level above just a professional or just a worker in that area. They are idolized. They have conferences around them. They have texts that go around them. They have whole ideologies that go around them. So it gave me an idea of, well, what was the process like? And it gave you the 7 liberal arts. If people
Mm-hmm.
really want to understand education and what it's about, you have to study the 7 liberal arts. And it goes in this order: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. That was the process. You had to learn in that process because if you did not, it could lead to mind control. What do you mean by that? Okay, here we go. Somebody who has grammar, they just know how to talk. They understand the definitions of words. Okay, so me and you can talk, but they can
Yes.
be persuaded by somebody who has rhetoric, which is using words to then change somebody's feelings about something. Okay, so you got grammar and then you got rhetoric. Okay, somebody who has grammar and rhetoric, if somebody uses logic, they're at a higher level. So now I can use the words and I can persuade you using things that typically make sense. Okay, bow, got those 3. Well, the person who has arithmetic is a leg up because now I can use percents, decimals to use stats to try to persuade you. And we know stats can lie and people can lie with the stats.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to the next level. That's geometry. Wow, what do you mean by geometry? And I'm meaning more of sacred geometry, where certain buildings are built to harness a certain amount of energy. Pyramidal structures. You might see obelisks or tekanus like we have at the Washington Monument. You might see them oriented towards a certain way, built on the right or left side of a river to represent the rising or setting of a sun. So that geometry was another level. What do we call the master builder? He has the philosopher's stone. Okay, it's all about building. At that time when it was being constructed, it's about building. Okay, so those who
Yeah.
have the skills to build, they're on another level. So then What about that? What's after that? Music. Music is a higher level of intelligence than you would say logic. We all know if you listen to a song or you grew up on a certain song, it can literally transform your life. Okay.
Yes.
Think about the type of music that we listen to, what we are gravitating towards, what we think is popular or what we think is good or what we think is bad largely comes from music videos, musics, songs. Okay. So song music can be a very, very strong influence on people's behavior. And lastly, astronomy. And this is one where we really are not privy to. A lot of our spiritual days, a lot of our very important days have astronomical significance. If somebody wanted to control a large number of people, what they could do is co-opt the movements of the stars and the planets and put certain um, uh, emphasis on those based on their own ideology. So they might say, okay, winter solstice, that is going to be this day in my system. Okay, spring equinox, that'll be this, that'll be this day
Hmm.
in my system. And now you can have a group of people that you can control through the use of astronomy. I know that was a long way to get to where we are right now, but that was just the beginning of your education. Once you completed the 7 liberal arts, you were then able to go on into a life of a bureaucrat. That means going through the political system, or you went into the priesthood. Okay, you learned about the spiritual system. But school still largely centered around one-to-one experiences, which means you found somebody in the neighborhood that knew how to do what you wanted to do, and you
Hmm.
did an apprenticeship. So you went to them. They showed you. They gave you the feedback. You did it again, and you became an expert at that through that process. Very different from what we see today, where everybody goes to school at the same time and they go through the same curriculum, they graduate at
Yeah.
the same time. Everything is very group oriented. And it coincides with the IEP. If the highest level of individualized education in our current system is an IEP, well, that just takes us full circle because traditional education systems were individualized. It was more of an apprenticeship. There wasn't a group aspect, 5 to 10, maybe 20, depending on what you studied. But it was typically a small group with the neighborhood expert. And then that really opened my eyes to, wow, there is more to meets the eye than I have been privy to. And
Yes.
that just opened up the whole entire world. So it made sense why during the Industrial Revolution, we all had to sit in rows and go through school at the same time and graduate at the same time because we had to have a factory-like education system to produce the workers to work in the industry. So it gave me the onus to bring us back to a more individualized approach to education, to working on a person's mastery, to working on developing their basic skills, to um, looking at themselves. Because remember, we always talked about you learn better when you have somebody similar to you teaching you. So it is not to say that other people cannot or that other people should not. It's
Yes.
to say that the optimal way is to have those that are similar to you teach, even if it comes down to children teaching children. That's just the science on it. Okay. So this is not my interpretation or what I feel. This has all been documented. We can go, and I need to give the people some scholarship because I've been talking a lot, but I haven't really. So, a couple of these books that you can get, like I said, Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. You can get Melanin, A Key to Freedom by Dr. Richard King. He goes deeply into this. You can go into a book called Intellectual Warfare by Jacob Carruthers. He goes deep into the science. Um, you can literally just start studying ancient tech. Start studying the Trivium Quadrivium. Okay. If you look up Trivium Quadrivium, that's the 7 liberal arts. There are schools today that still teach that. And those are the highest schools in the land. Phillips Andover in Massachusetts. This is a high school that feeds directly into Brown, into Yale, into Harvard. They teach the trivium quadrivium. Why
Mm-hmm.
your school ain't teaching the trivium quadrivium? It's different. They're being taught how to think, where you're being taught what to think. That's the difference between an African-centered education and what we have today. So, like I said, I just want to throw some things out there so people could do a little bit more research. And if you want some ancient documents too, you can look up. Oh wow, there's a book called the Hosea, written by Maulana Karenga, and it is a collection of ancient works. And there are a lot of excerpts in there about learning,
Okay.
um, and they talk about instruction, about how powerful it is. One of them is called A Song in Praise of the Learned, and it talks about those who have become scribes, such as yourself, Robyne, um, who have made their children the book and the pen, and who have taught others. And their monuments are not tombs or pyramids, but in the words they left for the others, and how high they were held in regards. It also talks about lessons to avoid. One of them is don't instruct a fool, lest you be called a fool. An ignorant person will hate you for trying to instruct the knowledge, because they will say, how arrogant are they to try to teach me something that I don't know? A friend of a fool is a fool. A friend of a wise person is a wise person. So lessons like this, so it teaches you have a long history of high intellect, of high education. And if you start with that, then what we see regarding self-esteem and low motivation to engage in academic tasks will cease to exist almost overnight, because they will see themselves in the curriculum and be able to imitate and function properly. So that was a long-winded way to answer that question, but you can see I'm passionate, and there's a lot of
Yes.
research that has gone into that.
And I also I'm gonna assume a new title, Robin the Scribe. I like that.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
kind of talking about, some of the things that you were mentioning. Um, I know where I grew up, which was on the East Coast before I moved out to California in my teen years, but there was, I feel, a higher, and I think it's because of the population there, there was a higher amount of value placed on Afro-centered education,
mm,
specifically in my community, than what I see here in California.
right,
If we're looking at, like, like the lack of just cultural representation in curriculum,
right.
how does that impact specifically Black students' academic motivation?
It significantly impacts their academic motivation. One of the main things, and I'm going to step back, in 2014, at the National Association of School Psychologists, I was able to present this information in a 1 hour paper presentation, and I also wrote a paper. And one of the main things that I found was the depression that young girls feel, as well as young males, but more so the young girls, from not seeing themselves represented in the curriculum. So
Mm,
that takes place as higher levels of depression and anxiety, low motivation to engage, and just a sense of oppression. If you can think of educational oppression, where you might go to school and you have to read Huck Finn. You might go to school and you might have to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And in those books, like I said, I've done thousands of hours of observations. I'll be sitting in the classroom taking notes, everything is all good. And I'll hear somebody reading the book, and all of a sudden it'll say something like, and then Nigger Jim came down the street with his bucket full of water, met Huck Finn, and they went off. Wait, what? What just happened? So those things slide under the radar, but they're part of your everyday curriculum. So
mhm,
I can be called that in the curriculum, but I don't see anything about Mali, ancient Ghana, the ancient Songhai Empire. I don't know anything about ancient Egypt, the Moorish Empire. Was I literally just in the bush with a damn grass skirt on? This is how your children are growing up to think. So on the East Coast, obviously, the waves of African people who came during those times settled in those areas first, and it's much more diverse. So yeah, you're absolutely right. there's a much stronger emphasis on African-centered education in the eastern states and in the southern states. But when you get to the west and the north, you know, although there are big populations of us, we're spread thin and the culture is even thinner. So because of that, you probably will see more mental health related issues and academic issues related to that specific issue than you would see on the East Coast or down south. So being able to see yourself in the curriculum is no different than what we've been talking about, that those similar to you are able to teach you in a more optimal manner. Once again, not that they should, not that they can't.
Yeah.
It's just that it optimizes the learning.
Okay. Interesting. And what is, I guess, for lack of a better word, what do you believe and you spoke a little bit about it, but the like relationship between racial identity development and educational success in Black youth?
That one is a very complex question, but it all literally goes back to what we've been talking about this entire time. But let's talk about that issue for a second. We have to touch back on the music.
Yes.
We have to somewhat touch back on the spirituality and what those things teach us about ourselves. When we talk about music, let's just say you take the most popular top 100 songs right now. They probably would come from hip hop, trap, and what they call R&B today, although I beg to differ, but that's personal. If you listen to those songs, you won't hear that type of language on any other radio station. And what I mean by that is self-deprecating statements, destruction of your own community, excessive drug use and sex. First of all, there's a place for that. So, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If that's played in the club, that's fine. But when you wake up to it, you eat lunch to it, and you go to sleep to it, that's a whole nother level of programming we're talking about. What does that say about education? You don't really hear a whole lot about, okay, I need to go to school and get an A, or I need to learn about the Songhai Empire. That's not even touched on. So our children are being programmed to not engage in academic success. And as a matter of fact, they're taught to hate knowledge. You come to them telling, wanting to talk about anything to do with academics or what you want to do after school, and it's almost like you're insulting them because we're in a culture of raising pathological adult children at large. We literally just want to run around and do what we want to do whenever we want to, not understanding that there's sacrifice, that there are those who came before us, that it is not just about us, that we are part of a much bigger culture, world, human race, and that you need to be able to contribute to that. So, those things really tear down our identity of intellect, ability to intellectualize, our ability to engage in academic tasks, educational tasks, and like I said, almost despise it. We've seen plenty of Family Matters episodes where Urkel gets beat up for knowing the answer. For those Gen Zs and those who don't know, Family Matters was a show we used to watch. The main character was Urkel, who was a nerd, very, very smart, very intelligent, but also got the brunt of physical aggression when it came to him showing his skills. He would often get bullied, would often get beat up, thrown in the trash can, simply for either being inquisitive or for actually being smart, for knowing the answer. So this is, in popular culture, that's what we're absorbing. And it plays out in the classroom daily. Once again, those thousands of hours that I spend in the classroom observing, those thousands of hours I do in group counseling and individual counseling session, a lot of it is breaking down those barriers and then exposing them to the information we just got finished talking about. Hey, by the way, do you know who Hotep is? He wrote the oldest book in the world. He actually talks about, a few things that you're going through right now. Matter of fact, here, you could read this on your own time. Oh, have you ever heard of Queen Nzinga? Oh, yeah, she led a revolt against, massive armies. Here, take this. Oh, you ever heard about the Haitian Revolution? Oh, wow, they almost got taken off the face of the world, but just with a couple of pitchforks and, going to the ancestral swamp, they were able to power up enough power to take over the whole the most powerful, army at the time, which was Napoleon's French army. That's when their eyes start to open up. That's when they start to say, "Oh, wait a minute, I never heard none of this. Is this
Yeah.
real? Is this AI? No, this is real. This you can go see it today. The monuments still stand." So, you know, it's difficult because being in a situation like that, you often come across others who do not see that the same way. They see it as being, uh-oh, da-da-da, woke, which I will tell everybody, stay woke. And if you hear the Master Teacher song by Erykah Badu, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So, you know, even that, let's just take that really quick. The war on woke. What does woke symbolize? Okay. It symbolizes being awake. It symbolizes being aware. It symbolizes being conscious of what's happening to you. It symbolizes vision and being able to see into the future and predict and plan for the future. But if you're not woke, what are you? You sleep. And what is sleep? Oh, I acronym for that too. Slave learning for each and every person. So if you're not woke, then you sleep. So I would say, and I would advocate for you to stay woke. Okay, this is not saying you're to start a revolution, but this is just saying your children should know who they are, where they come from, and what power already exists in their DNA.
Hmm. It's a powerful word there.
Yes.
Definitely some powerful words there, and um, just really, really love how you're encapsulated that and makes this. First of all, I really like how you make the information very relatable and easy to understand. Even you don't have to be on a scholarly level to get a lot of the principles and things that you're talking about. So I really appreciate that, and I know that's something that my listeners will appreciate as well. Um,
No, I hope
Kind
so.
of, yeah, kind of segueing a little bit, we've talked about a lot of resources. We've talked about a lot of materials, books, and a lot of those I'll have linked in the podcast description. But how can parents, caregivers, and even educators access more of your materials and content?
Oh, thank you for giving me this opportunity. And the first place and the main place I would always tell you to go is to JediLearning.com. That is spelled DJEDILEARNING.com. That's the hub. You can get our phone number, which is 909-576-0170 from that website and our contact page. You can get our email address, which is info@JediLearning.com. Email us with any questions, any comments, any concerns, and we'll definitely get right back to you. You can also find our Facebook page where we drop, I would say, probably about 3 or 4 times a week, tips,
Mhm.
parenting tips, learner tips, educator tips. And the last place you can go is our YouTube channel, where we do 3 things mainly there. We have virtual field trips, and that's our African Center because we go to places that are hidden in plain sight, that have a lot of historical significance, and it helps you to get a sense of what's there that you can access, and it's a teachable moment. So we have virtual field trips. We have our course clips where we have virtual courses and we take clips of those and we upload those for free. And once again, it's free information. Um, IEP mistakes, behavior parenting, classroom management, anything you may, how to address a tantrum, fucking back. And then the last thing that we have there are um, our tantrum reactions, where
Mm.
we're reacting to a live tantrum as it happens. So let's say one of our most popular ones are the parking lot tantrum. So a child's throwing his attachment in the parking lot, and we are reacting and giving feedback and giving a play-by-play on how to address a situation like that. So, a lot of the parents do an excellent job, and we have some that don't. So, but it gives you a good idea in real time of how those things play out. So you can get all that by going to Jedi learning back.
Right. And definitely, again, I'll have all those lovely resources linked for everyone in the podcast description. And before we wrap up, would you mind playing a little quick game I like to play when I have guests on called Robin's Random
Yeah.
Reflections?
Right. Let's do
So we've known each other for a while, and I'm pretty sure, I can be
it.
a deep thinker at times. Sometimes I just have random musings. But this time I actually catered a question for you.
Oh wow. Uh-oh. Let's,
So
let's see.
I know one of your loves is basketball. I know you like both playing basketball and watching basketball. And tip-off was yesterday. I do, and I'm not a big basketball fan, but I do know that. Tip-off was yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
So, in that vein, who are your top three point guards of all time?
Oh wow. She said of all time. Oh, that's a beautiful question. I just love thinking about that. Wow. Yeah, I'm gonna start off with number one, and then I'm just gonna work backwards.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite point guard all time is currently playing right now, and
Cool.
he's on the bench because he's hurt. But this is a person who, if you ever seen them with the ball, it's magic. It's literally magic. They can. There's nothing that they cannot do on the court. They're not the biggest. They're not the fastest. They're not the strongest. But it is, and he is very, 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 very culturally aware. That's my man, Kyrie Irving. He would be number one.
Okay.
Definitely number one. He has championships, multiple All-Stars, multiple All-NBA teams, his own signature shoe. I mean, the man's done it all. On top of staying true to who he is. So, hey, he sits right there on the top for me.
Okay.
If I had to go to number two, he was a little bit before my era, but he is an LA homeboy. He has become an entrepreneur businessman, one of the top assist leaders of all time. He still looks like he did when he was playing. He somehow discovered the cure to AIDS and HIV, and that is my man, Magic Johnson. This is a talent that you will never probably see again. Somebody who's 6'9", 6'10", running a point guard, um, one of all-time leaders in assists. And like I said, has done almost more for his community than any athlete that I can think of. He's bought the
Mm,
Dodgers. He's bought a 24-hour fitness out here, a Starbucks, a movie
yes.
theater. It's so much. So that's number one and two. Number one and two. And number three, oh, this is a hard one because, you only got so much room. But that would be my man, Mark Jackson. My man, Mark Jackson. And why would I say Mark Jackson? A lot of people may not know Mark Jackson, um, but he is the architect to your current Golden State Warriors. The reason they were able to win all those championships in a row was because he put that team together. They fired him and put somebody else in place, and they got to reap the benefits of that. But Mark Jackson was the architect of that. But as a player, an amazing, he also one of the top assist leaders of all time. Um, Defensive players, had a long career with the New York Knicks, LA Clippers, but he holds a special place in my heart because at the Fox Hills Mall, when I was younger, my family went up to him and his wife, and I can't think of her name, but she's also a famous singer. And they stopped, talked to us,
Mhm.
gave us autographs, didn't, shy away from it, didn't act like their nose was too high or that anything didn't stink. They were the ultimate human beings, and that always had an effect
Wow.
on me. So, Mark Jackson, number 13, I got to give it to my man. So, Kyrie Irving, Magic Johnson, Mark Jackson.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a quiet list there. And I really love the background that you gave and also that personal connection at the end, which is
Mhm.
always nice to have when you have like a personal reference on how things connect to one another. I think that's
Right.
even better, makes it more special.
Absolutely. Now, thank you for that question. Wow, that was a hell of a surprise question. Man, that was a good one.
I try my best.
I heard that. Excellent.
All right, everyone. That'll do it for this episode of Therapy by Choice podcast with my very special guest, Ken Kafele. You can keep up with Ken and Jedi Learning through his website, Facebook, YouTube accounts, and of course, I'll have everything linked for you in the description below. If you do have any specific questions or you'd like to request a specific topic to be covered, you can text me at 408-786-9651 or email me at robyn@therapybychoice.com. That's Robyn, ROBYNE, at therapybychoice.com. Also visit our website at www.therapybychoice.com and follow me on social media. My name is Robyne Vance. Take good care. While we hope to provide insight and education, our podcast does not replace therapy, and listening to our podcast does not establish a therapeutic relationship. If you or someone you know are in crisis, please call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988.